and welcome to Never Seen It Film Club, the film club where we watch films that you've never seen. I'm Emma Bainbridge from Accidental Theatre, and joining me as always is Robert J. Simpson from Cinepunkt.
That was very nicely rolled. What a shame we didn't get that at the start.
I know. I'll clip it in. It'll be fake.
Thank you very much.
Happy New Year, everybody. Although it's kind of a weird Happy New Year for us because it's technically the end of this season. We're finishing up.
Rah!
Ow! Jump scare.
Robert's very excited. He just wants to go off and watch The Room again. And again, and again.
In a few minutes, bitch.
People are very strange these days.
So if you'd like Robert to come to your film club to watch The Room and speak about it,
I would actually do that if people are willing to invite me to their film screening, especially if you want to hand me over some cash. I will do it. I will sell my soul. I am basically a man whore. I will sell myself for cash.
For Tommy Wiseau.
For Tommy Wiseau, yeah.
I mean, to be fair, what amount of cash would it take? Is it less or more than you think?
It's probably less than you think.
Money, please.
Oh, no, there's no money.
Fair enough.
I mean, I'm not that expensive, to be fair.
Cheap.
If Tommy Wiseau himself asked me to work on his next film, I would do that, even after having watched The Room more than once.
Oh, pretty good. We got a new client.
If he comes out with, what is it, Big Shark 2? Electric Boogaloo.
Mm-hmm.
Then you could be his friend in it. And
I mean,
left and center.
part of me just wants to go to LA and sort of stalk him and demand a part, but, you know, why?
I mean, that would definitely make for an interesting mini-doc series on Never Seen a Film Club, so maybe we do that. If you want to give us money so that Robert could go stalk Tommy Wiseau in LA, please do. Send us any cash and or GANs that you have. Right, just cash, just cold hard cash. No Bitcoin, because the fluctuation's bad.
Money, please. Money, please.
Ben.
Anyway, we're back, and this month we watched the 1981 super classic that is Mommie Dearest.
We're ready for you, Miss Crawford.
To a truly great lady, Miss Joan Crawford.
You need to live a wonderful and advantaged life.
You're a lucky little girl and very expensive.
I'm going to make a perfect life for you. Are you having a happy birthday, Christina, darling?
This is the best party I ever had. I love you, Mommy Dearest.
I love you, Tina, darling.
No wire hangers. No wire hangers.
No wire hanger!
That's the only thing I think of anytime I hear the name Mommie Dearest. So, unsurprisingly, this is a theme on this podcast, I have seen Mommie Dearest before. Had you seen it before Never Seen It Film Club?
Surprisingly, no.
Wow.
This has been a season of films that, for the most part, I hadn't seen.
Well, that's good. And this is a doozy because it's a 2 hour, I think it's over 2 hours.
2 hours, 10 minutes.
Biopic of Joan Crawford, starring Faye Dunaway, doing a very, very good impression of Joan Crawford. When we did put it on, I did have to provide, I did put a caveat at the very start of the screening to be like, guys, at any point, if you need a break, come and tap me in the tech box, because we can absolutely have a little half hour where we all regain our senses before we plow through this 2 hour marathon of whatever Mommie Dearest is.
Yeah, I kind of wish I'd had that warning before I started watching it. I sat down last night and watched it, so I was nice and fresh for today. And yeah, it didn't take long to get into it, to kind of go,
What scene was it that made you want to scream? Because I'll be honest, it's 5 minutes in for me where I just wanted the first time I saw this, I wanted the earth to swallow me whole.
Well, I guess the first observation I feel I should make, which is one that I have made repeatedly during this season, is I don't feel this film merits the designation of one of the worst films ever made. It's not that bad. objectively, it is overlit a lot.
We don't have that problem.
And it has that feel of a kind of TV movie for the United States, like a Hallmark movie, but some of them are quite good. So, I mean, in that sense, I've seen a lot of stuff that is worse than this, and it definitely starts off very turgid. But once the kids are involved and the daughter's on screen, actually, it improves drastically, I think.
Okay.
And then it just becomes hideously horrible because of the abuse that I see. And for me, I'm not put off by the acting, which I gather, you know, they earned Razzie nominations, I think somewhat unfairly. Faye Dunaway isn't bad. It's definitely partly because of her makeup. It's high camp.
Yeah.
It is very theatrical. It's very over the top at times. But actually, the whole depiction, it sort of works with the character. And like, I'm watching those scenes of her abusing her daughter, and it looks very real. It looks very physical. And it's increasingly uncomfortable as that goes on, as you realize. And I guess it's my experiences of having been in an abusive relationship all come back to the fore when I was watching that. It's, you know, you sort of see how it starts off very small, little things, little kind of controlling comments and gestures, and then it gradually ramps itself up to more physical things. So that, I think, is why I find it, it's that kind of resonance in it. For me, it felt very real. It felt like a very real depiction of what an abusive personality is like. Or can be like.
Yeah, there was a lot of kind of back and forth after the film. Here we had quite a good discussion about it, of being like, a lot of us in the room kind of having experiences of people with like kind of either bipolar disorder or multiple personality disorder and things like that, where it's how quick someone can change. And I think that's one of the things that the film does actually do quite well, is show how it's not big kind of sweeping insanity that can cause problems like this. It is a small trigger that can send someone off into the realms of beating a small child with a fucking coat hanger, which by all accounts is, well, we'll get into that in a second. Or just the scene that I found particularly difficult wasn't even the physical abuse scenes per se, because again, I think some of the campness took that away from me. The thing that got me the most was the scene in the bathroom where
with the floor,
where she starts scrubbing and like pouring pure bleach powder all over this like 8 to 9 year old girl, and it's like, we must like clean it now, because I'm like, that kind of psychological warfare that someone has inside their own head is impossible to like to get into in any kind of a way. I don't think there's no way to. I don't think it was overly dramatized. I think those scenes in particular, which tend to be the ones that people kind of make fun of and stuff. Case in point, hello. But I think those moments, as heightened as those emotions are actually the realest for me. Yeah. Those feel like the most taken out of someone's kind of life, because when you're at that kind of heightened emotional point, you're not pretending that you are shrill, you are overstimulated, and that kind of, and people get like that, and it is that dramatic. Yeah, the makeup has a lot to answer for, though. I feel like the eyebrows, alone,
yeah.
The slugs, and she's white for like, and I don't mean like white, but she's like Casper the Ghost white a lot of the time. So she kind of just emerges with these big, sluggy, badly drawn on eyebrows and this huge red mouth, like it creeping out of the sewers.
Hi, Georgie. Aren't you going to say hello?
And I don't know if that's fair to Joan Crawford, but again, maybe it's because this is based on Christina's autobiography. Maybe, and she, like, there's back and forth about Christina in this film. Look into it. We'll maybe chat about it in a second. But initially, I think her kind of descriptions of what her mother was like is where they've picked this up from. So for me, with the makeup and the kind of costume designs being over the top, I'm like, but if you're an 8-year-old child, that is kind of like the monster vision you have of somebody, I think.
Well, I guess maybe that's part of it. I mean, I know Joan Crawford came from the silent era, and there is an element of the silent era and the black and white film stock that she was originally being shot on that probably follows through into the makeup, where it would have been more exaggerated in order to create certain kinds of effects. And, you know, that point about her being like a monster to that child in terms of appearance because of that disconnect, I guess, because of that youth. Maybe that is entirely appropriate. That does make you seem more scary. Especially, I mean, Christina has talked about, actually, she did get to go on sets and stuff and see her mother at work, mostly in the dressing room. So she wasn't really allowed on set because her mother was involved in very kind of dramatic and adult themed filmmaking. And so if her experience is the dressing room, which is where that makeup gets applied, then maybe that is indeed appropriate if that follows through. Now, I've not read any version of Christina's memoir, so I don't know how, you know, where the differences are massively there. But it's certainly a valid point. I mean, it also works quite effectively to make her seem more ghoulish, which is presumably the point that filmmakers want to try and do, because there is that sequence in the bathroom that you talked about. And Crawford comes in with her night makeup on, her night mask, and she's screaming away. And she does look like a ghoul.
Yeah.
It's very, very pronounced in that point. It's very disorientating. It is like watching The Exorcist. It's that kind of resonance, and that's obviously deliberate. They didn't want to paint Joan Crawford as a lovely human being with some flaws. I think she's largely painted as a monster that could dress like a lovely human being on occasion. So it's hard not to separate the filmmaker's agenda from anything else. And the overlighting that they do is also part of the problem. I think in better lighting, that makeup might have worked better.
Possibly. I do. The love of this film I have comes from its references in pop culture. Particularly, again, big surprise, this is like the Grey Gardens episode all over again. A lot of drag queens like this film because there's these kind of iconic moments, and like it is very high camp and it is high drag in the way that they have her. But again, if you look back at Joan Crawford's life and the way she presented herself, she was that kind of, she was really trying hard to be America's sweetheart, but there's always something just a little bit off. Like she is this, back in the day, she was probably like this very she's an attractive woman, but she was very handsome. She wasn't like that kind of pretty. So when she transitioned out of, as you said, the silent movie era, where like stronger looks were a benefit to this kind of, if you look at like the transition to the softer lenses and the kind of nicer, more delicate featured people that you start to get in the 40s and 50s, which is, I think this is set in the late 50s, isn't it?
Starts in 1939.
Yeah.
And then runs through to her death in 1977.
Yeah. So you're just getting to the point where like you've got all these like delicate featured little actresses coming out and getting all of the good roles. I mean, to a certain extent, she's like Goldie Hawn's character in First Wives Club, where she has gone from playing these really interesting, strong, independent women, and she's losing all those roles because she's too old, she's too fierce looking, and she's a nightmare to work with.
Is it Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard?
It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark. All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
There's a quote out of Joan Crawford's where she said, you know, if you want the girl next door, go next door.
Yeah.
You're like, don't go to her. You're like, that wasn't what she did. She'd come up, she'd been a flapper, then she moved into sort of serious films. She'd done her best to lose her southern accent and to present herself in a way that a lot of actors at that point couldn't do when making the transition to sound pictures. But there is clearly, the point that we reach is when her career is kind of at its end point, really. I mean, this is 30 odd years before she dies, so she is probably in her mid-30s at this point.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a discrepancy about when Joan Crawford was actually born, but she's in her 30s, heading towards 40. She does feel a lot older, at least in terms of the depiction of the film. So there is that element of trying to work within a system and trying to find your place and being a little bit lost. and trying to do something else and to mold children in a way that she wasn't.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, but it's not a favourable interpretation of Joan Crawford in any way, shape, or form, and I still find it very hard to not see anything but what she does with her daughter specifically. Although actually, I mean, there's a little bit about her son.
Yeah.
And I mean, the most shocking thing there is seeing him tied to the bed, which apparently she did so he wouldn't get up and walk to the toilet in the middle of the night. But she also had 3 other adopted children,
She did, yeah.
one of which was taken back by its parents within weeks of the adoption. And then there were twin girls, and they were about 8 years younger. But they don't feature in the film in any way, shape, or form.
No.
And I know it's partly because this is about Christina and Christopher's relationship with their mother, and their experience was very different, supposedly, from the twins. The twins have always said that they had a great relationship. And that is, I mean, I think that's a hard thing for people to understand as well, is that this is quite possibly a truth. And the other stories may also be a truth, because you can be different things to different people.
I think that's one of the most interesting things that when I looked into the kind of background of this film that I kind of discovered was how Christina's autobiography, she said, like, it's quite true to the screenplay, but she has come out since and said that, that parts of her were exaggerated and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, of course it is. It's a film. But for the most part, her experiences of abuse and stuff, she's kind of fairly stuck to. Mm-hmm. Same with Christopher. Christopher goes back and forth. Sometimes he talks a lot about abuse as a young child, and kind of the being tied to the bed and stuff. He has also said that Christina's a liar to certain points. I don't think they had a great relationship towards the kind of last 20 years after this film came out, because he was running around debunking it. But then I think again has since come out and said, well, my relationship with my mother was very difficult, but it was ultimately this. But I think it is an interesting point about how everybody has duality. It is completely plausible that just because the twins had a good experience, that Christopher and Christina didn't. Anyone who's got a sibling knows this. I mean, it's not hard for me to imagine, certainly, because my parents were very different towards my brother than they were to me, and in opposite ways. Like growing up, my brother was golden boy to my mum, and still, like until the day she died, he was. Whereas I was a daddy's girl. My dad was very stern and very strict with my brother, but wasn't with me, and then vice versa with my mother. So it depends on who, like if you talk to me and my brother, we had very different parents, even though we lived in the same house. There's also a massive age difference between us though, and he was a bit of a wanker, to be fair. He's 15 years older than me, so my dad was dealing with like a boy, like a 20-year-old man and a 5-year-old girl at the same time. So maybe that's why, but anyone else who has siblings can tell you that your parents definitely can be different people in the same household and within the turn of a dime. So that kind of rings true for me. So people who kind of come out and say, oh, you have to pick a side, and Christine's a liar and exaggerating, I'm like, she's probably not, because, and again, people can change a lot between children as well.
Well, she's been very consistent as well. I mean, she's 84 now, and she's still dealing with her stuff. She's written, I think, 4 or 5 books, all about issues of mostly about issues around abuse and particularly how women are treated. And it is something that she has been consistent about. And even the twins have come out and said, look, it was more the twins' children, have talked about their experience with their grandmother and said, like, we remember her very fondly. We had good experiences. She gave us presents, etc., etc. But we realised that Christina's experience may have been different.
Yeah.
And I think that, obviously there's family tensions there as well. And there is, we're in an era where it's much easier I think we generally accept when a child talks to you about abuse, that is significant, that there's probably truth within that. Whereas in the 70s, when she told her story for the first time in print in 1978, that was still frowned upon. This was looked as the first tell-all story, and it was the first book that told about the abuse of children from a child's perspective, from the proof of it, from the experience of a survivor of that, from someone who'd lived it. So it was groundbreaking, and I mean, clearly she's not happy about the way that the film depicts things. I wonder how much that's about how the film depicts her, as much as it is about how much it depicts the story, because actually the beats are the same. The kind of the general stories, the shocking bits, are in the book. They're in the interviews that Christina has given in the years since. So I kind of wonder, is that where the issue is? And seeing yourself on screen played by somebody else can't be an easy experience. That's got to be hard, because you know that you'll remember a conversation. You go, we didn't say that. Yeah. Why are you putting those words in my mouth? You're making me seem like something else. Yeah, especially someone who is depicting you based on a book you've written about your worst, lowest moments. Without any context of you as a whole person, and then doing it, I don't mind I'm terrible, I'm sorry, I'll insert it here. I can't remember the actress's name who plays Christina, but I think as a protagonist, the younger Christina, I just want to backhand. She does come off a little bratty at times, and that makes me feel like I should not have children. Because I would Joan Crawford it. No, I'm joking. No, I think the very young Christina is very sweet and kind of gives like a good, like nice, gentle performance of a child who's been brought up in a kind of mad world. Child actors are not usually my favorite thing. Personally, I don't think there should be child actors, but that's another conversation. I don't know. But yeah, so she's quite good. Then older Christina, I don't know. There's just something that I can't warm to her about, and I don't know if it's the writing of this, like if it's the dialogue or if it's her essence. But there's something about her where I'm like, you are a little bit of a dick. But she's not. She's like a perfectly I think she as a character, she's not bad in any way, shape, or form. I just think it might be that actress just irks me a little bit. I mean, she is sort of left having to play a character. The age is roughly between about 14, 13 and near enough 40. So it's quite a big range to ask of an actor. She was 24 at the time she played this. I think I got it. It's her haircut. It's a haircut. That's the problem. Never mind. Yeah, I mean, there was something about it that didn't sit well with me either. But again, it comes back down, I think, to the stylization, the visual stylization. The film put me off more than anything else. Yeah. The aesthetics of the sets and of the costumes. And I know from having watched other stuff, it is something about the aesthetics of that era in Hollywood depicting earlier times just seems a little bit off in a way that sort of doesn't happen now. Yeah. I think there's less care in the 80s for period pieces for sure. There's and even the late 70s, if you look at anything kind of those eras, unless it's a Western, weirdly, Hollywood kind of didn't care. It would just get bits and pieces and wouldn't really worry about it too much and just MDF everything and kind of make do. Whereas now I think if you did this now, the opulence of that house and the spark, it even though it's supposed to be this spit polished divine house, it looks a little bit not grotty, but there's, as you said, there's a matte finish missing. It's too dull or something for me, where I'm I don't believe this as a location. And equally with the costumes, they all look a bit cheap and a little bit not quite there. So it's 80s styling, the sleeves on the birthday dresses. If you look up the pictures from that occasion, it's not these big fucking puffball sleeves that are 3 feet high. They're just normal pioneer dresses. So maybe that's just the 80s love of the pad coming in, the shoulder pad coming in. But yeah, there's something about the aesthetic of the film that's unsettling. It's very Uncanny Valley. It's like a remake of a better film for me. If that makes any sense whatsoever. It's did you ever see the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho? Yeah. This is kind of what this feels like. I mean, there's definitely a story to be had in there, and it actually does merit a reworking. I know that Christina has produced a musical version at one point, which I haven't delved into in any detail at all. I think the story is strong enough. I think that the account is strong enough. I think the characters are strong enough that it could well be another film. And maybe with 2024 sensibilities and 2024 kind of production values, it would be a really good biopic and probably an Oscar winner, let's be honest.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
This just, I mean, I think the other problem with this film is it came, I mean, this is released in 1981. Joan Crawford died in 1977. There's barely 4 years between the two events. In the meantime, I mean, the film ends with the point where the will is being read and Christopher and Christina are deliberately left out of receiving anything. Now, eventually they sued the estate. They managed to get 55 grand between the two of them, which was a fraction. The twins got 75 grand each, 75, 77 each. So there's definitely an issue there as well. This just maybe was too close to the event. There were far too many people there who were thinking, look, she's barely cold in her grave. You don't go around saying things like this about people when they've just died. This is of a different era when that kind of respect for the recently deceased. There was customs, there was practices. I mean, it's not like now. I mean, even now though, there is that way where you kind of got to wait a little bit of time and then you can start to tell the stories.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe we'd believe it now in a way, probably a little bit quicker than then, because we're more used to it.
Yeah, I would say so. It would have been. I think it would have been interesting as well, because I think having, if in 1981, if you had your parents who'd grown up watching Joan Crawford movies and just knowing her as like, and again, tabloids in that kind of in the 60s and stuff were very localized, especially like Hollywood Tatler and stuff would have been very localized to like LA and like certain states like New York and stuff. They weren't like the National Enquirer is not even now. So these kind of like behind the scenes tidbits of what a nightmare Joan Crawford is to work with don't kind of trickle out into the general populace the way that it would not. It's definitely not the way it would now. So if you had people who'd grown up with this screen legend who they'd seen as this just very proper lady for most of their lives, who was well spoken and was in Mildred Pierce, which is possibly like, it's definitely my top 100 films of all time. I think it's great. And then shown them this, the disbelief and the disgust that they must have felt would have been like, it would have been an interesting gauge, certainly for me. So I think you're right. If you made it now, I don't know. I think the time frame would have been a lot shorter, but I think people would be much quicker to be like, oh, absolutely. Did you see that new biopic of Joan Crawford? Everything in it is absolutely true. There's no pinch of salt. It's like The Blind Side. Blind Side came out and suddenly everybody knew all about this athlete's life. Everything was completely 100% true. And come to find out, none of it's true, but lots of it is greatly exaggerated. They have been in court now for the last year and a half for Michael Orr. And good as Sandra Bullock is in that film, because she's great, the amount of sympathy that family got for like being these white saviors and like people just wanted to believe something about it. But when you bring out the dirt, people are like, oh no, not them. They couldn't possibly. There's a film about them saying how good they are. So I think it goes both ways, certainly.
Yeah, as you said, like as you point out, the way that the Hollywood system worked back in the 40s and 50s and 60s when the bulk of this film was set, there was a different kind of system in place. It took longer for stuff to get out. The tabloid magazines did exist. The fan magazines existed. And apparently, I was reading a Larry King interview with Christina earlier on today, and supposedly there was the Confidential, which was one of the US kind of celebrity tabloid things at the time, were ready at one point to produce a front page story all about how bitchy and horrible and abusive Joan Crawford actually was, and it got nixed by the studios because, again, those papers were also in league with the studios who had to protect their stars, and Crawford did work for 7 of the 8 or 8 of the 9 big studios that were in Hollywood at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The one she didn't do was Paramount. I think it was Paramount who distributed Mommie Dearest. Ironically enough, but she did MGM and Warner Brothers and everything else. So there is that. The stories can exist, and also, I mean, like I keep reading bits about. Oh gosh, who was it? Her first husband.
Oh God.
I've been to his grave as well, so I should know.
She has a lot of them.
Momentarily lapse of memory, viewers.
This is what happens when you have to watch.
It's not John Barrymore. Douglas Fairbanks Jr.
There you go. I hadn't even Googled it, guys.
It's in there. It's in there. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. says that, you know, this wasn't his experience of the woman that he knew when he was married to her, and I think that's absolutely fine, because maybe his experience at that time was actually of something that was very different, that was much more pleasant. And it's only when Joan gets a bit older, it's only as her own instabilities get worse, as the system uses her differently, as she receives success and entitlement, and then has children. All those things change relationships.
Yeah, especially when you take into, I think one of the glaringly obvious things to me, having watched this film, and it's just a throwaway line quite near the start. It's about Joan Crawford's inability to have children, and that's fine. But she's had several miscarriages at this point. And now, as a modern audience, we're very aware that if someone goes through that amount of trauma, it's going to have an impact on not only their relationship with other people, but with themselves as well. Mm-hmm. So I think if you knew a younger Joan Crawford before all this terrible stuff had happened to her, because it's a hard thing to go through, then I think that on top of all the other stuff that she's also had to deal with, like, because let's be honest, the studio system, not ideal for anybody to go through. Wouldn't recommend it. They're sort of trying to bring it back. I don't think we should. I think we should leave it in the past, because it wasn't ideal to be a woman in the studio system, especially one as outspoken as Joan Crawford, which is another thing that gets my goat up, because I'm like, was she actually a nightmare to work with? Or was she just somebody with a backbone? That's the other thing. And at that time and place, I mean, I'm sure Betty Davis would definitely disagree with me. But she's also dead, so she can't. I just think that, again, what's lost in this film particularly, and again, I don't know if it's because it's from one person's point of view, it's this, we lose the kind of duality of existing as humans. I think there's an expectation of us to be one way all of the time forever, and like this thing that people don't change. And I don't mean that in like a big romantic sweeping people can change way. I'm like, just naturally as things happen to you develop you either go one of two ways. You either become a hard-boiled egg and get tougher and less malleable over time, or you go the other way and you become a soft banana and things just downtrod you and you become a mushy little mess. That's my philosophy. It's $10.99 on my ebook. Hard-boiled egg or banana, choose your path. But I think that's what's missing from this film for me, is that it's all one side of a person.
I think there's a little bit of softness, though. I mean, as the story goes on, I think there is a softer element of Joan Crawford that starts to come in. There's just not a lot of time spent with it.
Yeah.
I know there's a bit of dispute about, there's different attitudes regarding whether or not Joan Crawford actually took on the role of her daughter, her daughter's part in that soap opera, out of an act of kindness to make sure that the job was still there for her daughter, which is actually what the producers of that soap opera said, or if it was just an attempt to kind of undermine and get back on TV, which, I mean, it's interesting. But the older Crawford who literally now can't go to the awards ceremonies because she's too elderly, because she's too frail, because she's an old soak, basically. There's definitely a softening.
Banana.
Yeah, a little bit, but it doesn't go far enough. We don't see enough of that before she has the children. We don't see enough of that after. And the same is also true of Christina. I think that there's, the stories about her from other people that have worked with her are a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
She is not always painted as the nicest of people. Some people have found her very difficult to work with, said that she can't take direction or instruction whenever she worked as an actress. These are not my opinions. I've never worked with her. These are the opinions of people who are on record as saying this. And there is an element of, like, when you hear something like that, you feel that that's something that is probably worth discussing. Clearly, Christina is painted as quite obstinate and determined and is willing to fight her ground. I mean, that scene over the stake. On the one hand, I kind of feel this is absolutely horrible bit of abuse of a child. I mean, I dare say most families up and down the country at some point will have had to use the "if you don't eat this now, you're going to get served this later on" kind of argument in a futile attempt to get their children to eat. But that one goes on and it goes on, and it's really uncomfortable. But at the same time, you kind of think, well done you for holding your ground and Christina and saying no to this, that this is not acceptable. But there is a couple of elements where you see her pretending to be her mother, telling off, kind of posing, doing an award acceptance speech, and then telling off her own teddy bears, using the language that obviously her mother uses at her, which again, uncomfortable but also brilliant. And you kind of wonder, like, there's an element of her aping her mother within that doesn't get explored enough. And again, I do wonder how this would be approached after Christina dies if they were to remake it. I feel that maybe that's material that would probably be expounded on further, and maybe again this is where the film is lacking. Why? Because you can't do that then, because she's alive, because she will sue.
Deformation of character. I think it'd be a really interesting project. I think where this would be really kind of good is in my new favourite thing, which is TV series that are 5 episodes long and shot very well and are great, but don't either. Again, I have a... All right, I'm going to get into it just for a second. Just come here, bear with me for 2 seconds. I'm of the opinion that film should be 90 minutes long. 80 to 90 minutes is more than enough for a film. I say that. 2 of my favourite films, Jaws and Silence of the Lambs. Let's not get into it. But I think there's a new trend at the moment, and certainly this film feels like that, even though for a different reason maybe, where big directors and big names get to make these 2 and 3 hour long films that should be cut up into 5 episodes of a decent TV show where they can explore themes a lot better. And I think a Ryan Murphy version of Mommie Dearest would be very good. And I think it would be he would take an interesting spin on it. But I think you're right. I think you'd have to wait until Christina's dead and can no longer sue. Her estate can try. But it's one of those things of, like, with The Crown and stuff as well, like depicting people that are still alive and still active and stuff, and who could still potentially see the depiction of themselves. I find it a little creepy. I'm not a big fan of biopics that feature people who are still alive. It's not my favourite.
It's complex, because you know that whenever they do it, the same when if you've got a biopic that has involved someone in the process. I haven't seen Priscilla yet, which I'm on by. Priscilla's based on Priscilla's memoir of her relationship with Elvis Presley, but that obviously has issues. Priscilla's daughter had issues with the film and the screenplay. Her mother obviously doesn't and has given it her full approval. There's a complexity there. If you look at something like, was it the Johnny Cash biopic? Johnny Cash was very involved in that. I think Ray Charles was involved in his biopic up until the point where they pass and the film gets released after, but that still influences what gets done. So if you've got official any project that is authorized by an individual or a company is already tainted and skewed, because you can't avoid it. In order to get that official stamp of approval, in order to get the benefits that gives you, you have to make compromises, and they have to approve. And it is a very rare individual that will sit down and go, do you know what, warts and all, that's fine, you do whatever you want. And when you've got people that are alive, there are libel laws that exist for a good reason, and you can do a certain amount with dramatic license with it. The Weird Al biopic is clearly a parody, so he's able to get away with it. But because you have because those laws exist, you depict someone in a certain way, you have them doing a certain action that they've never done, you will find yourself at the end of a major lawsuit. And that's something that those parties can't afford to do. So that's why the individuals that we see depicted in this are largely either anonymous, or they're composites, or they're dead. Christopher is hardly featured at all, and the one thing that kind of is featured is him being strapped to the bed, and he's on record with that. It's Christina's story, so that's why she's there. That's why the twins aren't there, because to picture the twins in that would have run the risk of a legal suit, which happened to Christina later on. They did sue on the 20th anniversary tour whenever they were doing whenever she republished the book, because of the way that they were depicted. They said it was wrong. And there was an out-of-court settlement for $5,000. Not a lot of money, but there was a settlement. So all these things are complex, and it does mean that when you watch something, you have to bear that. When you watch a biopic, you have to bear that in mind. I like a biopic.
Okay.
Hollywood likes a biopic.
Fuck it, yeah, they do.
And Hollywood likes biopics that are about the arts and the media, because it's them looking at themselves, making films about themselves. It's what they know. So all that stuff, all that trappings about this, they're okay. I mean, like, I was watching it last night, and you know, my partner didn't have a clue. You know, doesn't know who the actors are, doesn't know about the stuff. You know, so it's meaningless. So what you then concentrate on is the relationship between those two, and the relationship between mother and daughter is interesting. It's hostile. It's fraught. It's tense. It's complex. It's horrible. But it is also nuanced. You know, you have elements of a relationship that's not just about abuse, but there is some sort of affection in there, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Hard to understand, but it's there.
Again, I think this speaks a lot to the complexity between, parents and their children in general, but I think it does bring up an interesting topic of adoptive parents and their children as well, where you can, again, definitely have the duality of a very complicated relationship. It's something that, like, growing up, because no secret, like, I grew up, I was an adopted person, and there is an element that you'll never get over, that you're not their biological child. So you can't, again, not speaking for everybody who's adopted, but for me and other people I've talked to, there is just this element in your head that's like, they don't love me enough, and I will never be enough because we're not biologically linked. And then there's a certain element in your head that goes, are they being mean to me because I'm not real? So I think that and I think that's what Christina explores very well. Having read bits and pieces of the book and, like, watching this, I think that kind of, she says it without saying it, that complex relationship between everybody and their parents. But when they're a mega superstar and horrifically physically abusive and mentally abusive, maybe it's a little bit more interesting to watch, but I don't know. I don't know. It's nice that there's a film about a complicated parental relationship, because ultimately that's what I view this film as. People call it a Joan Crawford biopic, and I'm like, that's incorrect. It's not.
No, it's not.
It's really an exploration of Christina's point of view of the relationship she had with her mother. Although, having said that, the "Don't fuck with me, fellas" scene might be the best moment in any movie I've ever seen, ever.
Don't fuck with me, fellas! This ain't my first time at the rodeo.
And I quote it, not daily, because that would be a bit much, but I quote it often, especially upstairs at Accidental Theatre when we're doing tech meetings, and I'm the only woman sitting in the room. And I get to say it loud. But that's it. So all in all, yeah, it's a long, interesting, scarring, jarring look into complicated relationships with parents, children, coat hangers, bleach, straps, and Hollywood. And dresses and cake and things like that. Because that also was just... But anyway. So, it's... the reason it's on the list, I always have to explain why stuff's on this list, especially the Z-list season. The next season, not so much. But this season, mainly it's the chewing... I would say that Faye Dunaway chews the scenery. But again, as we've discussed, it might be because she is characterizing a certain point of view of a character. Personally, her makeup is terrible. Your makeup is terrible, but I love you anyway. The sets are awful. The lighting is very, very bad. And it's just, to my mind, not a great film. And features a lot on lists for being Z-list. And I agree. Robert might not agree, but I think it should be on this list. Maybe quite low down on the list.
No, I mean, I think not Z-list, not proper Z-list territory. There's some stuff there, I think, because of its topic, because of its timing, I think it merits something a bit more. I get that it was, that it kind of wasn't well received at the time, that people did lambast it, but also it did provoke a lot of conversations. It was a certain kind of success, and I find it hard to look at the Z-list as being feature films that had a certain amount of success and notoriety, unless they were shite. I mean, The Room has been quite a success in a weird kind of way, but it's unquestionably bad. This, I think, does have some stuff. I think it's over long. I agree with that. Cut out a big chunk at the start, and I think it would be a much better film. I don't know if we need the bit before the kids arrive. It feels very slow and very awkward, and then it kind of gets... And I think some judicial trimming throughout it would have done it a lot of good. A miniseries is definitely the way for this to be reapproached.
I think so.
And maybe give a bit more into both Joan's history and also Christina's history, both of which are kind of interesting in their own right. So I think it merits a remake. I think merits looking at again. I think the story itself is fascinating and well worth looking into. But Z-list, it just ain't. It feels like a TV movie, and I kind of just lump it in with them.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
If you tell me this is going to features into cinemas, and I have a bigger issue with it. But if you say this is a TV movie, it is what it is. I can go, yeah, this is a TV movie. It feels like it. It feels like a TV biopic, and I'm okay with that.
Fair.
But cut 20 minutes out of it at least, 25. Get down to an hour 45, and I think this is it's bearable.
Either cut this down, director's cut it down to an hour and 45.
Regrade it.
Yes, fuck me. Regrade it. The audio was also pretty terrible. The levels in it are fucking woeful, but that's me. Everything's on the left channel. Go figure. I don't know why. Marty, if you're listening to this podcast, please tell us why they decided to do that, because it was a nightmare to balance in the room. Anyway, but that's it. That's the last film that we have to see. That's a bad film probably for a couple of months, because our next season, as picked and as displayed below here probably, as chosen by the Never Seen a Film Club members, is let's talk about sex positive films that make you think. So we've got some great ones on that list. It's definitely going to push the boundaries and comfort levels of some people, I think, which is great, which is what I like to do. And we've got some classics in there. We've got She's Gotta Have It. We've got Belle de Jour. We've got Y Tu Mama Tambien, Bound, Cruel Intentions. So it's a good mix. You'll notice that there's nothing beyond 2010. That's not my fault. That's just what happens. But we have got we might even sprinkle a few extra screenings through this season, so we might do some secret podcasts. We don't know yet.
I mean, I haven't been involved in this in any way, shape or form, so don't come blaming me if your favourites aren't in there. I'd have thrown a couple of curveballs in for you. I might still do that.
Yeah, I think that might be on the agenda. But thank you for joining us today. Thank you for supporting Accidental Theatre and Cinepunct and this podcast. We're very happy to have almost 100 subscribers. We are, I think, at this moment in time at 97, so we've 3 to go.
That's
so if you know 3 friends, get them to subscribe, because it would mean a lot, just because it's a round number, and we would appreciate it. But we very much thank you for joining us today. You can follow Accidental Theatre on most things at Accidental Theatre. It's very easy to find. Just Google it. Links are here below. But where can the lovely people follow you guys?
You'll find Cinepunct on most platforms. We are, generally speaking, Cinepunct, although on Instagram we're Cinepunct Film. And you'll find me as well. Just Google my name, Robert J. E. Simpson, and I'll turn up on most social media platforms.
Yeah. And we'll haunt your dreams and your nightmares. Just like Joan Crawford. Don't fuck with us, fellas. See you next time.